Page 302, we're going to do some reviewing on lessons 5.1 through 5.3. So lessons 1 and 2 they group together, which is on writing two-step equations and then solving two-step equations. So number 1, the total number of students in 7th grade is 9 more than 4 times as many students as are in the art class. There are 101 students in the 7th grade. Write and solve an equation to find the number of students in the art class. Let X represent the number of students in the art class. So if we just look at the statement they made here, the first thing they said, total number of students in the 7th grade. So tells us 101 is the total number of students in the 7th grade. Is means equals 9 more than 4 times as many students as are in the art class. Okay, I'm going to start with this part about the art class, and then we'll look at the 9 more than part. So the people in the art class is X. 4 times as many students as are in the art class would be 4 times X. We want 9 more than that. So this could be our equation, would be one way of writing that. And we're going to actually go ahead and solve this equation then. So over with the variable, they're adding 9. So we can subtract 9 on both sides. And then they're multiplying by 4, so we can divide by 4. And when you work that out, you get 23. On this problem, you should come out with a whole number answer. If you don't, if you come out with a decimal or something, then you probably made a mistake. And once again, we could, if we had time, we could substitute that back in the original equation. So if you take 4 times 23 and add 9 to that, you should get 101. Two just asks about what steps we would do. So for that one, they're subtracting, so you could add 6 on both sides of the equation, and then they're multiplying, so you could divide by 5 on both sides. If you work that out, we're not going to go through that one here, but if you work that out, you should get X equals 10. Number 3, to solve for this, part A, first of all, they're adding 3. So we can subtract 3 on both sides of the equation. If you want to draw your line here, so you can make sure you're doing the same on both sides of the equation, you can. Then they're multiplying by 4, so we can divide by 4 on both sides. And we get Y equals 4. And if you put that back in the original equation, then that works. Okay? Make sure you know how to solve the problems using the steps like we're showing here. That's how you're going to have to do the problems going into high school and beyond. You know, it's not a good practice just to think, oh, I'm just going to guess numbers until I guess what works. It's not a very efficient way of doing it. Okay? You're better off just to learn this method, and you're going to get quicker the more you practice it this way, and then you'll find out it's a lot easier for you down the line when the equations will get more complicated and stuff. Part B, first of all, they're subtracting 3, so we can add 3 on both sides. And then they're multiplying by half, you could divide by 1/2. For doing that, you might know 1/2 is the same as 0.5, so you could just change it to 0.5. If you do it this way, or if you weren't allowed to use a calculator, Remember, dividing fractions is keep, change reciprocal. And then you work it out and you get 16. Section 3 was on solving equations using the distributive property. So, number 1, says that there are 450 seats in the lower level of the concert hall and B balcony seats in the upper level. So far 170 tickets have been sold, which is 1/5 of the total number of seats in the concert hall. Now this question actually has been changed. The question they had here wasn't actually the correct question they should have been asking. The question now is how many balcony seats are in the concert hall? So one thing it tells us that 1/5 of the total number of seats is equal to 170. The total seats, it says that there's 450 seats in the lower level and B balcony seats. So this would be one way we could write our equation to start out on this problem. And then if we write it like that, we could distribute. And 1/5 times 450 would be 90. And then it's a positive 90, so we need to subtract 90 to get that by itself. And then you could say they're multiplying by 1/5. I'm going to divide by 1/5. Keep change reciprocal would be like multiplying by 5, which would be 400. So 400 balcony seats. A different approach you could do on that one, you could say that there's, if 170 is 1/5, if that's 1/5 of the seats, if you took that times 5, that would be your total seats. So you could say, well, there's 850 total seats, and it's the balcony seats plus the 450 lower level seats equals 850. And then you could subtract 450 and you'd get 400. So if that makes sense to you, that might be a little bit simpler way of doing it, but either way is fine. And then if we look at number 2, they want us to solve this equation that's already been set up for us. So first thing, we would want to distribute. And then we've got a negative 32 to get rid of. We would want to add 32 on both sides of the equation. And then they're multiplying by -4. We could divide by -4. And if you divide that out, you should get negative 30 and 5/10, or negative 30 and a half. And as always, if you have time, substitute that back in the original equation, make sure it works. Page 271 is the mid-topic checkpoint. Number 1, explain how to isolate the variable in the equation negative 2/3 n plus 7 equals 15. So isolating the variable would mean that we are solving for the variable. Basically, we're getting just the variable by itself, and not only that, not only just getting the variable term by itself, but we're actually figuring out, in this case, what n is equal to. So you can just think about what you would do if you would solve this, and you can actually go through those steps if you want, and you can think about, you can draw a line here if you want to make sure you're doing the same thing on both sides of the equation. They're adding 7, so you could subtract 7. So that would be one thing. We could say subtract 7 from both sides of the equation. And then the last thing, there's 2 options of what we can do on this last step, but mainly what we've talked about, since those are right next to each other, we could say those are being multiplied, so we could divide by negative 2/3. So the second step, you could say divide by negative 2/3 on both sides of the equation. The book talked about multiplying by negative 3/2, which works. If you take something times its reciprocal, you get 1. So that would work also, but if you want to stay with doing the opposite operation, this would be a way of doing that. So again, just write that out in words. Just say, we're going to subtract 7 on both sides of the equation, and then we're going to divide by negative 2/3 on both sides of the equation. Number 2, Jake paid $13.50 for admission to the county fair and bought 9 tickets to play games. He spent a total of $36. What is the cost C of 1 ticket? Write and solve an equation. Okay, so I'm going to take this to the side here so we can have room to work. Okay, so basically to start with, we could say that the admission plus the tickets equals our total. So the admission we know was $13.50. The tickets, they're saying C is the cost for 1 ticket, and it tells us that he bought 9 tickets, so that would be 9 times whatever it costs for 1 ticket. And then that equals our total of $36. So that would be our equation to start with. And then for solving this, the first thing would be to try and get that variable term by itself, try and get the 9C by itself. This is a positive 1350 here, so we need to subtract 1350 to get rid of that. Be 2250, and then they're multiplying by 9, so you could divide by 9. And if you divide that out, you should get 2.5. This is the cost of something, so we'll go ahead and say that would be $2.50 for each ticket. And we could actually write out a sentence there, make it a little bit nicer if you wanted. Like a lot of these problems, this one has other ways that we could have set that up as well. You could have said, well, it was $36 minus the $13.50 for admission, that would be how much he paid for the tickets altogether, and then if you divide that by 9, that would give you the cost of one ticket. Okay, and if you have any kind of a hard time coming up with an equation, just think about working it out. Think about, how would I figure this out? Okay, so maybe even without coming up with this equation that I just did, you could say it was $36. I'm going to subtract off the $13.50. So it's $22.50 for 9 tickets. So if I divide that by 9, that's going to give me my answer. Okay, and then once you do that, then you could just create this equation. Think about, what did you do? Well, first I subtracted, and then I divided. To make sure that we're subtracting first, we can put that in parentheses. Number 3, they're asking which equations are equal to this. Select all that apply. So what I would do on this one would be use the distributive property to simplify this equation, and then see what we're looking at. So half of 4 is 2, half of 8x is 4x. So 2 plus 4x equals 17. So this first one's not going to work because it's exactly the same, except it has an 8.5 instead of 17. The second equation right below it, I probably wouldn't give something to you like this on your test, but technically if you took this equation we've got, if you multiplied by 2 on both sides of the equation, you would get this equation. So technically that is equal to that. The third one's got 4x equals 15. Well, if you were going to solve the equation, our next step would be to subtract 2. If you subtract 2, you'd get 4x equals 15, so that works. And then the last option doesn't look real great. One thing else you could do on these, if you actually solve this out, you would get 15/4, which would be 3 3/4 or 3.75. And what you could do then, like say for example this equation here that we said worked, you could say, well, if I subtract 4 and then I divide by 8, what's going to happen is you would get 3.75. So that would be another way of checking it, would be to, if it's in a different format, you could solve it, and then if it equals the same value for x, then it would be fine. If it doesn't, then it wouldn't be. So this last one over here, technically this is a positive 17. You'd subtract 17 on both sides, and then really that's a negative 8x. You can add the opposite if you want, and then you need to divide by negative 8. If you do that, that would be 1 7/8, so 1.875, so that doesn't work. Number 4, Clara has 9 pounds of apples. She needs 1 1/4 pounds to make 1 apple pie. If she sets aside 1.5 pounds of apples to make applesauce, how many pies P can she make, right, and solve an equation? Okay, so there's different ways you could do this. One way you might think about would be just to try and work it out and then come up with an equation. So if you have 9 pounds of apples, if you set aside 1.5 pounds, we could see how much we have left, which would be 7.5 pounds. And then if it's 1 1/4 or 1.25 pounds per pie, you could just take 7.5 divided by 1.25. So think about what you did then. You can make up an equation. You could say 9 minus 1.5. I did that first, and then I divided by 1.25, and then that equals the number of pies I can make. Another way of doing this, you could say that 1.25 pounds times how many pies we make plus the 1.5 pounds that we set aside would be equal to 9 pounds. If you set up that equation, they're adding, so you could subtract 1.5. They're multiplying, so you could divide by 1.25. And you would get 6, which means you could make 6 pies. If you worked that out and you got like 5.9, you'd have to say, well, we could only make 5 pies, technically, according to that recipe. Okay, technically, we could just have a little bit less apples on each of the pies and it would work to still make 6. But anyway, as it is, it came out evenly, so we don't have to worry about that. And then if you did this other equation, you could just, the variable's already by itself on this equation, so just subtract and then divide and you'll get the same answer. Number 5, they want us to solve the equation, so this one would be distributing first. And then try to get the variable term by itself. There's a -7, so we need to add 7 to get rid of that, to get that to cancel. And then they're multiplying, so you need to divide by -4. Okay. And really, the more you practice these problems, the steps are pretty much the same each time, so repetition will make you better at working these out. Number 6, 4 friends attend a school play and pay $6 per ticket, and they each buy a healthy snack bag, so they spent a total of $34. And the question is, how much did each healthy snack bag cost B? Okay. If they didn't give us a variable, we could define a variable. We could say let B represent the cost of a healthy snack bag, or whatever letter you want to pick there. So it's 4 people. They paid $6 for a ticket, and then 4 people also bought a healthy snack bag. Their total cost was $34. So this would be one way of doing the equation. You could also say there's 4 people, each of them bought a ticket plus a healthy snack bag. Okay, you could say each of them is going to pay 6 plus B, and then if you distribute, you're going to get the same exact thing as we have. So however you want to write that's fine. So if you multiply these, and then they're adding, or it's a positive 24, so we need to subtract 24 to get that to cancel. And then they're multiplying by 4, so we need to divide by 4. When you divide that out, you get 2.5, which means it costs $2.50 for 1 bag. So this gives you an idea of how to write two-step equations, solve two-step equations, and solve equations with the distributive property. Have a good day.